Я вітаю всіх, хто приєднався до нас. Медіа-центр України продовжує.
Welcome everybody who joined us. Ukraine Media Center continues its work, and right now in our studio we have First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Emine Japarova. Ms. Japarova, you're welcome, and we'd like to discuss with you what are our achievements about expelling the Russian Federation from international organizations. First of all, from the UN Security Council. You're welcome. Hello, dear colleagues. It is always a pleasure to come to Ukrinform and to speak with colleagues, because I myself was a journalist and I understand that delivering information on sometimes complex issues handled by diplomats is important today, but also there are some things which can not always be shared. So I hope for your understanding in some sensitive issues, especially about when we are talking about strategic matters, especially when we are talking about the strategy of pushing the Russian Federation from the Security Council of the United Nations. That's what has the task imposed by the President of Ukraine, that we cannot always discuss it. Indeed, in the very first days of the war, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, imposed a very clear task on our Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, and our whole system, our whole agency has been working full track in several areas. Sanctions pressure, expelling Russian Federation from specialized agencies, programs, conventions, treaties, wherever we can do it. Because basically the Russian Federation, with its crime not only against Ukraine, but we have also to remember about Georgia and Syria and other frozen conflicts which are in some way or another related to Russian Federation. And there are some activities in various continents now, including Africa, Near East, and so on. It all discredits the Russian Federation as a country which should not be entitled to be represented, to be present in international organizations. I'll tell about it in more detail. I'll use my notes not to forget something. I understand that details are important here. Also, a priority for us is getting assistance for Ukraine, including humanitarian assistance and weapons again. It's about a very broad range of matters we have been handling today. And I was asked to tell you in more detail about what are our achievements in pushing Russian Federation away from international venues. Yesterday, we had the General Secretary of the Council of Europe, Maria Pecinovich-Buric, who visited Ukraine. This has been her first visit during this year. I'd like to remind you that she is almost the only leader of international organizations who visited the first summit of Crimean Platform in August last year. There was also her other visit when she visited the administrative boundary with Crimea, and she was among the first people when the war started who responded to these crimes committed by the Russian Federation. And now the first organization from which we expelled the Russian Federation is the Council of Europe. Technically, we did it in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and in the Cabinet of Ministers of the Council of Europe, and then we fully expelled the Russian Federation. And for the Russian ambassador, it was a shock, especially when they removed the Russian flag from that flag alley in Strasbourg. Our next big victory has been expelling Russian Federation from Geneva, including the Human Rights Council. I think this is the venue which Russian Federation was traditionally using to spoil everything we were doing, trying to interfere with details, with reports created by UN officials, especially in the issues of human rights violations, because we have been working on this track actively since 2014, speaking about occupied territories of Crimea and Donbass. Also, we got Russian Federation expelled from the World Tourism Organization, from the Danube Commission, from a number of international institutions for economy, transport, energy, telecommunications, academic and scientific sectors, as well as many sports organizations. Russia has lost its status, lost its status of an observer, and they stopped cooperation with it in the European Organization for Nuclear Research, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which includes more than 50 key countries and 20 global core economies are members of this organization. So it's a shame for Russian organization. It claims to be great, and we see how it uses various artificial narratives trying to push this idea also Organization of American States and European Organization for Nuclear Research. They're organizations where we are still unable for various procedural reasons to expel Russian Federation, but in those cases we try to block participation of Russian Federation in various events of such organizations. We have already stopped appointments of Russia within various accessory and specialized institutions of the UN or related institutions, ECOSOR Commission and convention authorities. And in this context, it's very important to emphasize that as an important tool, there is the Ukrainian candidacy. Basically, we literally several weeks ago, we had very successful UN Forum for Indigenous Nations. This is traditionally very successful, was very successful institution for Russian Federation, but I am from indigenous nation, indigenous people. And it's very important to understand that in the Russian Federation, their laws only recognize as indigenous if they are within 30,000 people. So they first colonize the territories, then they bring the number of those indigenous people down to that small number, which is no danger for Russian Federation anymore, and then they recognize them as indigenous. And this permanent forum for indigenous people, I participated in its session in April in New York, and traditionally we would send those actors, as we call them, who would tell how great is the life of those indigenous people. That's in best traditions of Russian Federation. But now we have our candidate, and since January, our candidate will start carrying out its responsibilities, and we supported for years. And for many years, Russian Federation held that position in our regional group. It has been a very important victory for us. Crimean Tatar Suleiman Mamutov, a professional international lawyer who has experience of working in international organizations, and I'm sure that when he will represent our state in that platform, it will be successful. Also, Ukraine has been elected for 2023 to 27 to Women's Rights Commission, Social Development Commission for the same period of time. Also, in April, for the first time ever in the last 10 years, Russia has lost its position in the UN Committee for Non-Governmental Organizations, as well as Unicef Executive Board and UN Women Executive Board. So these are leading boards of those organizations. A very important part of our activities has been about UNESCO. You know that in Kazan in this summer there should be a board meeting of the World Heritage Commission. And since the very first days of the war, we said that it should not be allowed because, again, you know, Russian Federation has been destroying our cultural sites, our cultural heritage sites, national heritage sites. So Russian Federation should not be entitled to hold any similar meetings in its territory. And actually, within the framework of UNESCO, 46 countries first refused to participate, so they actually announced that they will boycotting their boycott for the Committee for World Heritage session in Kazan. And then on the 21st of April, the Bureau decided to postpone that session of the committee, which was planned to be held in Kazan in Russia. So to summarize, we really appreciate this support. We call this process the Putinization of the world. We believe this is a matter of principle, and I can tell you for sure that I have often to communicate with our partners to travel abroad. I see that Russian Federation has been toxic. Now, when you're talking about Russian Federation, you don't even have to explain the context because everybody understands that context. Since I have had my personal way since 2014, that's sort of vendetta, as I say, some revenge against Russian Federation. Previously, it was much more difficult to do it because Russian Federation managed to dilute it, to pass responsibility onto somebody else, to create some artificial narratives. But by now it has been much more obvious, although not without problems, but you know, it has been much easier now to show what is Russian Federation about. Now I'm done with my statement. Ms. Japarova, now we see in the news that the Parliament of Lithuania passed a resolution to recognize Russian Federation's actions in Ukraine as genocide. What steps are made by our MFA to increase the number of such countries? Look, there are several categories of crimes. When we are talking about international law, there are 4 categories. It's about crimes against humanity, war crimes, crime of genocide, and crime of aggression. Each of those crimes is considered by the respective institutions and entities. You all probably remember that when in March Karim Khan, the prosecutor, arrived to Ukraine, there have been more than 40 countries who asked him to investigate war crimes in Ukraine. And that visit has been important because we understand that Russian Federation's liability is about crimes having persons committing it, having their face, so to say, and that's the key thing. In end of April, there was an informal meeting of ARIA in New York. I participated there, and we had leading experts there and leading countries. We had Karim Khan there too, and they emphasized that those crimes should be investigated. And our position has been this: the prosecutor's mandate should cover not only war crimes and crimes against humanity, but also a crime of genocide. And since there is a parliamentary track, this is a separate track when parliament members call on other countries, and I know that dozens of parliament members work in their groups to appeal to other countries' parliaments to recognize it as genocide. But this is a legal framework, and this is more difficult. We have to prove it, we have to verify it, we have to gather this information. And here too, by the way, we have been supported by other countries. I will tell you in more detail later. But the crime of genocide, we believe, is where Karim Khan, the prosecutor, jointly with our general prosecutor Irina Venediktova, can and should consider it. Another track is a crime of aggression, which is not within the responsibilities of the prosecutor. And Mr. Kuleba said about that, and he told you about that. We decided to launch an ad hoc mechanism, separate tribunal for the crime of aggression. Now we are running consultations with our partners about the modalities of our operations for the tribunal operations. And we are in touch with leading experts. We have recently signed a declaration between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and leading experts whereby we start those activities. Again, I cannot share those details for the reasons I mentioned, but we believe that there are good prospects, very good prospects to get to this tribunal. And the Russian Federation as a state should be and will probably recognize the state committing a crime of aggression against Ukraine. And this too will have its consequences. In particular, it's about paying reparations, paying compensations for all that has been damaged and is being damaged by Russian Federation in Ukraine. Ms. Japarova, how do you treat the process? How do you see the process of creating pro-Ukrainian coalition? This is basically this is what the first part of my speech was about. The Russian Federation has been toxic, one with whom one should not be dealing with. All diplomats say it. They didn't know till the very last day that the Russian Federation would invade, because there was such a system that their Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia is just some sort of decoration. We also saw it when there was a meeting between Minister Kuleba and Minister Lavrov in Antalya, and Minister Lavrov did not have a mandate to decide anything, even for humanitarian issues. We understand that in a country like the Russian Federation, diplomats are just puppets in Putin's hands, which is a police authority, in the hands of FSB, and they also have to somehow clean their crimes, and their diplomats are doing it every now and then. And since there is this anti-Putin coalition, we have already seen it in that meeting in Ramstein. That meeting was very important in terms of you know, we saw how the attitude towards Ukraine has changed in terms of weapons. We mentioned it in the very first days. But the tactics implemented were to prevent us from falling. But now we are talking about victory, and for us to win, for us to have victory, we understand that even the negotiations track depends a lot on the results in the military field, on military victory. So for diplomats, priority number one is about weapons. All the rest is just about current activities, routine activities. But weapons are always on the agenda for all our ambassadors. Thank you, dear colleagues. You can ask your questions, but please introduce yourself and speak into the microphone. I'm Vitaly Golod from Ukrinform. Could you please tell us, you see, the Verkhovna Rada, the parliament, supported a call for the Congress of the US to recognize Russia as a state that sponsors terrorism sponsor state. If the US Congress makes such a decision, what consequences will be there, legally and actual consequences for the global community? And my second question is this: if such decisions are also made by other parliaments, then will it strengthen our positions in international courts of law? Thank you for your question. You know, there's a joke. Judges also read newspapers. They also read newspapers. We understand that international courts, international judges are also independent in their decision making. They are based on facts, on reasoning, and collection of such data is precisely what the state of Ukraine is doing at the Ministry of Justice level, at the Prosecutor General level, at the level of experts in law enforcement authorities. That's precisely the feeling that we provide for our memorandums, counter-memoranda, where we are to provide justification of our position. But what you mentioned, when the Congress and other parliaments recognize it, it's about political pressure, and it creates a certain macro atmosphere, and it's difficult to make decisions against the fact that dozens of parliaments recognize the Russian Federation as the aggressor, the terrorist country. It's very difficult to, it's then about credibility, about trust in those judiciary institutions. So we have to split it. One track is political pressure, which you mentioned. That's about documents, and that's a component of political pressure about the popular standing expressed through the parliament. And the second track is about justifying, evidencing in court institutions, in judicial institutions. It's not easy and simple, but it's important to create an atmosphere, a climate in which courts will also make such decisions. But you see, here I have no doubt that we have strong legal position. Today we see how delegation after delegation visits Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka. Yesterday I visited Borodyanka with Secretary General of the Council of Europe. We visited Borodyanka and Irpin, and she saw it with her own eyes. Today, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany and the Netherlands, Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, President of the Council of Europe, President of the European Council, Charles Michel, who visited Odessa. And then before that, he also visited the places of such crimes. All these are additional components of visual evidence which we'll also use to justify in courts. Now about the courts, there is the UN International Court. You know, there are 3 conventions under which we sue against Russian Federation. Since the beginning of occupation of Crimea and war in Donbass, there were the conventions against racial discrimination. That's about Crimean story, about elimination of all financing of terrorism. It's about Donbass, and the Genocide Convention, Convention Against Genocide. We sued 2 days after the beginning of full-scale war. We very quickly filled all the necessary documents, and as soon as on the 16th of March, the International Court of the UN made the first tentative decision. The first one was in 2015 about restoration of operations of Crimean Tatar Mejlis and restoration of access of Ukrainian citizens to Crimean Tatar language. Russian Federation ignored that decision, and I'd like to remind you that the decisions of the International Court of the UN are mandatory. The same about this decision under Convention Against Genocide. The decision was made that Russian Federation should immediately withdraw its troops and stop its crime, and as traditionally the Russian Federation has ignored it. It's important because later in courts will show that the Russian Federation is completely ignoring decisions by the highest judiciary authority. And of course, again, it creates preconditions in which judges will make their decisions. The second track is about the International Criminal Court. Again, about Karim Khan. We are talking about the personal responsibility of those perpetrators, criminals who perpetrate those crimes. And this is a very difficult process, an easy process of gathering such information. By the way, Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Ms. Maria Pechina-Buric, since she was in touch with Irina Vedyiktova since the very first days of the war, Irina Vedyiktova asked her to create an expert group to gather those data, and she has already been working, and we have assistance in that. There is Poland, there is Lithuania, who have created the Joint Commission for Investigation. Literally, late in the last days, there have been French experts with their DNA labs to investigate and to study dead bodies of those people killed, to make it later part of the verified set of information to be submitted to the International Criminal Court. And the last part is that ad hoc mechanism, that hybrid tribunal against aggression. These are three big tracks, and currently, again, we have been running consultations to decide what will be the basis of this tribunal, because it should be recognized internationally. So we have several options. We run consultations with the EU, with the Council of Europe. We have run bilateral consultations with some of our partners about the basis to launch such a tribunal. Thank you. Any more questions, dear friends? No more questions. Thank you, Ms. Japarova, for joining us, for finding time to join us. Thank you, dear friends, for being with us. Please monitor our announcements. Now we are developing our schedule for tomorrow. Thank you. Stay with us. Thank you.